What's up, my people? Welcome to Fellowship Bible Church's Sermon Spotlight, where we're coming at you each and every week with a fresh weekend to debrief in an effort to send biblical truth. What better way to do that than by the power of conversation? I'm one of your hosts, Caleb Pearson. Back with me in the host spotlight, Mark Francis. Mark,
what is up, Caleb? How are you?
I'm good, man.
All right, so I've seen you for a few minutes now, and I'm looking for your visual people watching. We talked about the same shirt, I feel like, last time I was on this podcast.
So
Caleb, do you wash
I do
that
laundry.
shirt?
It's been 2 or 3 weeks since I've seen you.
Do you own 10 shirts, or do you own one shirt that you're wearing the same one right now?
I didn't anticipate that coming.
I
but
didn't
I'm
either
glad
until
it
I'm
did.
looking at it. I'm like, I can't ignore
The last
that.
time we were here, I was wearing this shirt, yes. But
Okay.
it's washed, it's clean, it's all good. He's back after 2 weeks off. We dearly missed him. I assume he dearly missed us, but I'm not going to ask him. Senior Pastor Mark Carey. Mark.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Good. Yeah.
I saw both of you from afar yesterday at the Fellowship Together Kids Zone event.
It was great.
Outside, the outdoor stage, and everybody coming was super cool. You were wearing a farmer hat, weren't you? Mm-hmm. Okay, there you go. You're such a farmer.
Got to protect the skin.
One little kid came up to me and says, "Why are you wearing a cowboy hat?"
Yeah, well, it made you easily recognizable. But you were walking around doing stuff. I mean, initial thoughts on the weekend and even
the
kids
weekend was great. I mean, we've been promoting this idea of having some fun things to do as a church, and this fellowship together concept has just started to really come into its own. Where we know we're going to be doing other events this summer, but this is the first one, and the kids had a musical they wanted to do, and doing it indoors didn't seem to make sense. Doing it outdoors made sense, and the merging of let's do some fellowship family activities. And the musical was great. The kids did great. Games and activities and food, supporting a local homeschool co-op for some food. And I didn't do a true head count, but we're talking hundreds of people. And socially distanced and as best we could, and being outdoors, and it worked. I loved it. And so thanks to a lot of the tech people to make it happen, because from a sound perspective, we were wondering how can we make 45, 50 kids sound where they can be heard and make them sound good. And it was amazing.
It was
awesome.
And thank you for the perseverance of those kids who, for 18 months, because we had to cancel it last year.
It's the same musical.
Yeah, and different kids got involved because others weren't able to. And so it was a great evening, and the sun got covered right at a right time, and it was just an ideal. A good time. We need to do those things as a church body. I talked with numerous people and new people to FBC who didn't have any kids in the program, but they just want to start meeting new people, and so it was a win-win everywhere.
And I talked
around.
to a family who hadn't been back to church for a year and a half.
Sure.
And they came on FSAT, so the Saturday night service, they were there, and they came to this. They're like, we're just craving to get plugged back in. And that's neat to see.
Yeah.
And just a segue of the sermon, it's a great application and model of living a life of worship and having our minds set on things of God's Word. And what the kids presented of just trusting in the Lord, and what Danny and the Shacks provide for us from an Old Testament story translates to, hey, I'm still humming those songs in my head.
There you go.
They're very well done, very cleverly written, and the music was really toe tapping and everything else. So it was
It's great.
Yep.
Good.
Awesome.
Good time.
Yep.
All right, guys. Well, let's go ahead and jump into a Sunday in review. We've been in Romans 12, had Pastor John over the last couple weeks, so Pastor Mark was back this weekend, talking about worship, a life lived or a song sung. And so, Mark Francis, I'll come your way first. Let's dive into everything FBC discussed this weekend and see where we go from there.
There's so many things. I mean, I shared a couple weeks ago on the podcast that this has always been one of my favorite passages in Scripture. And hearing it taught and unpacked like we did this week, and then for me even having a chance to respond with communion as that, I would love to talk even more about how that came to be, of being at the end of the service and application time. But the spiritual service of worship, those 4 words kind of stick in my head, and that is, when you even unpacked it, Mark, in the very beginning, of just kind of breaking it down one phrase by phrase of answering those questions. I thought that was great because it just puts that scripture passage into perspective of, okay, well, what are we called to do? He's urging us, and then by the mercies of God, and then present your bodies, and then it's being acceptable to God, and then that's your spiritual service of worship, and just put those together in a way that all calls us to say, okay, this is a life of worship now. Mm-hmm. This is not just a worship service. Mm-hmm. And I felt that it encouraged us as a body to say, guys, it is not just showing up here. It is not just listening to sermon. It is not just doing a quote-unquote worship service, checking the box. And I don't think we're a church that does that, but we always need to be reminded of that. Yeah. And so coming into a gathering like that to be reminded of that's what we're here to do, I think is the benefit of the gathering, of that tool to remind us that this is the gospel that we're here to live out, not just remember once a week.
Yeah. You get a little bit of the feel for, and that's always a challenge, but a little bit of maybe the feel of what was in the mind of Paul as he wrote this. I mean, clearly he's writing this book to a mixed audience in Rome, Gentiles and certainly Jews, and there was apparently there was a bit of a tension, maybe a conflict. The Jews had been kicked out of Rome some years previously, and they were probably filtering back in as Paul's writing this, and there, as so oftentimes, there can be tension if you don't look like me or act and talk like me, then then I'm going to then I'm going to push you aside, or we kind of hang out in our cliques. I like to hang out with people who are like me is the mentality.
Right.
So here's the church mixed with Jews and Greeks, and Paul interestingly uses some Old Testament concepts here of the sacrificial system, and this idea of the altar and the animal sacrifices and the burning up of it all, the consuming of the sacrifice, that he is now applying to the church and saying, you know what God wants of you? Do you know what he's calling us to? It's like that animal that's burned up on the altar. I mean, consumed totally. It's a total commitment, a totally devoted sacrifice, and that's what we, in the totality of who we are, that is what true worship is in this day and age. And knowing again that in the Old Testament there was a place to worship, and when Jesus was here on earth, he was visible there. He tabernacled among us. He, the glory of God, and so that people worshipped him. In Revelation in heaven, I mean, we're going to bow down before the throne because we'll be in his presence. But right now, where is his presence? Well, he's within us. We are the temple of the Holy Spirit. And so it's like the seriousness of this has just jumped up of a magnitude of millions, because we are the temple of the whole, and we are the sacrifice. And so now we're forced to ask the question, so what does that mean, and what does that look like? And that's where we can so easily just, again, check the box. We did it for an hour and a half, and we think that is the worship that and then we're on to our life. We're living our life the way we want it lived. I'm going to the work, I'm doing this, I'm making my money, I'm raising my kids, or whatever, going through life. And no. It's
how many people really catch that the seriousness has been raised in this form of worship? Because you think about the Old Testament, and you describe, there is prescription after prescription of how Israel is supposed to worship and what they're supposed to do. And if they didn't do it right, man, bad things happen. And we don't see bad things happening when we don't worship improperly, or when we worship improperly here in this day and age. Yeah. And so people kind of out of sight,
the ground doesn't open up, or fire doesn't come down.
Exactly. Nobody's being struck dead because
there are times I wish it would happen. But
because they went to the Holy of Holies, inappropriately.
Right.
There's just this out of sight, out of mind. I'm going to do my own thing, but the seriousness has been raised, and God's prescribed form of worship for us, you might think, is silent. I'm putting quotes around that in the New Testament, but it's not. There is still a call for us to remember the gospel and to be reminded of who God is, and then live a life in response to that. And that kind of what Paul is summarizing here of this, spiritual service or act of worship or life of worship, that the seriousness is the same. God is still a God of the Old Testament and New Testament here and now, and he still calls us to worship, but it's a little different now because of the cross.
You have to break down that clock in, clock out mentality of our Christian life. I think it's so easy to buy into the appearance of it all or the etiquette of going to church versus, living the life unseen day in and day out. I mean, I just had a meeting with our student leadership team from youth group. We just had our final Sunday morning class together for the year. We'll take a break for the summer, and then the next year of leadership will take off. And the lesson I kind of pointed us to was just this idea that you guys are still going to be leading in your environments. There are students in this youth group that look up to you. Your reputation is going to be Christ. And so there should be no element of, now that the Sunday class is done or youth has taken a break for the summer from this class, that I can just immediately pivot out of leadership. Yeah. You're a person of influence. You're representing Christ.
Yeah, we so easily compartmentalize life. And we silo it. So this is my work life, this is this life, this is my family life, this is my church life, and it might be an hour or two a week, or if I'm involved in, and so we compartmentalize, and a life of worship permeates our relationship with God is to permeate everything we do. And I think the last thing that I wanted to communicate in this sermon, I don't want it to be legalistic. I mean, and you can see how it could easily slip into that. Yeah. So we get beaten up by, oh yeah, I should have done this, or should, I used an illustration in one of the services, not in all of them, about how I been a bit convicted about using free time, and so I shared how my study mind isn't maybe as sharp at my age now as it was 15 years ago, where I could do much more in-depth study for longer periods of time. I need some breaks more in terms of my day, so I can be engrossed in something, and then I just got to take a walk, do something, or watch an old Western. And I mentioned that the old Grit channel, and you watch a Western. Well, okay, is that the best use of my time? Is every hour, every minute of my life being presented to, is this, Lord, what you want of my life? I did have someone come up to me at the Kids Zone thing. He said, hey, Mark, let me ask you a question, because he said, I love to watch old Westerns too. You're not saying that's sin to do that. Well, no. So, you see how it can be slip into a now we're rigidly legalistic. That's not the heart of God.
Right.
He doesn't treat us that way. It's still by the mercies of God, not the heavy-handed fire and brimstone of God. You do this, but I beg you of the mercies of God. So we always come back to the cross, and to your question earlier, that's how it fed in, I think, nicely to the communion service.
Yeah.
Because it flows out of that understanding. We always come back to the gospel. We always come back to that, and we've been bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God.
And something else you said a little while ago too is that it's the totality of our life. And downstairs, I was in Fellowship 3, and Scott Newen led the communion time there, and he read a lot of in-depth Old Testament stuff. And one of the points he made was just how the sacrifice was meant to be burned up, all of it, and totally consumed. And he used that as an analogy of today. It's like, this is meant to be all of us. If we're that sacrifice of worship, it's the totality is what God's expecting of us. Not half of it, not 3/4 of it.
To sell that totality is to pivot away from the religious side of, here's all you need to do, and start to say, well, here's everything you are. Here's who you are. To really it's easier to buy into something if we're talking about my identity and the implications of living that out, compared to, I'm not yet in favor with God, or this is how to get there.
But by the way, did the transition go okay? Because in my first service, I tried to pass that off. And
it was great. It was fine. It was a little rushed and quick, but we had it queued up and it was ready to go. So, downstairs in Fellowship 3, typically the sermon comes on after the singing and after communion. But when you have communion at the end of the service, and at the end of the sermon that, Mark, you led upstairs, there's a little challenge for Fellowship 3 people. Right. But, so we were able to just, as soon as you called up Scott Newland, we kind of slowly fade to black and slowly fade down the audio, and he steps up and took it and ran with it. So
Okay,
it was
good.
great. There
Good.
you go. There's the recap for
There
you.
we go. Going back to something you said, Caleb, and Mark as well, this idea again of the totality. The question is, how do we get to that mindset? How does, Mary and Joe FBC or Harry and Sally FBC or get to that mindset? Because I don't know if any of us are there. It's a process. It's a lifelong thing in different stages of our life, and it doesn't mean that we check our earthly life at the door. I mean, it doesn't mean that everybody has to sign up and be a missionary in Thailand like Joel and Rachel McManigal did.
Right.
It means while we're in the midst of doing life on this earth, how do we decompartmentalize it? It's the two issues, the two problems. One is the importance of decompartmentalizing our life. The other is deinstitutionalizing our concept of worship. And both, it's a balance that we have to. So how can, Sally and Harry FBC come to a point where the default thinking is this idea, yes, I have been bought with a price. My life today is to be lived for the glory of God while I'm doing raising my kids, doing my neighborly things, going to work.
You can't feel guilty that you're going on vacation. You can't, and enjoying God's creation.
That's
You can't
it.
feel guilty that, I'm not immersed in His Word 24/7.
No.
But it's that relationship. And we've talked about this on the podcast before of knowing God and having a relationship with Him, being in His Word on a regular basis, not all the time, but regular, to where it comes, your mind is being renewed, and His way is coming into your heart and your mind, and you're kind of constantly having that ongoing dialogue with God.
Yeah.
There's that, pray without ceasing concept. There's that idea of just the relationship that you know Him so well, God, that as you're doing life, it's more instinct instead of, stop, wait a minute, what would Jesus do in this moment?
Yeah.
And have that bracelet. It's that concept of just the relationship with God that
It's the
stems
habits of the
everything.
heart.
Yeah.
So here's the $64 million question. How do you guys do that? You're newly married, and so you're forging some habits
Right.
in married life, and just how do you make that relationship with God personal?
I'll go first since Caleb's got
You've
his
been
mouth
married
full.
longer.
Yeah.
This stuff is not scripted, by the way.
Yeah.
I
No,
mean,
it's good.
For me, I feel a little, not guilty, but it feels like that because I work here at church, I feel like I have the opportunity and the privilege to be more immersed in these conversations. And so I really appreciate that. I value that. And rubbing shoulders with you or other pastors around and just the day-to-day logistics that we're thinking through, still God is present. So I feel privileged that I'm around that kind of an environment. But you know what? I also have a different environment with a different job, with a different world where I'm not there. And so it actually, they coexist because of my thinking of where is God in the moment with work, whether I'm working with a real estate client or whether I'm interacting with my wife, who she'll probably tell you that, he comes home and he is this different person. but still there's the aspect of, I am engaged with His Word on a weekly basis. I am thinking things through of, what is being a worship leader? Right. How can I call our body to live a life of worship to God? And so from my worship leader hat, I care about our church, I care about our body, and I'm constantly engaging God in those, in my own head dialogue. So that it's not really answering your question, but I feel privileged because I have that opportunity to be engaged around other people who have a similar mindset. So I can see how it is more challenging to be in the world and not have those circles of people. And so the body is so valuable. Being isolated is not where it's at.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it's easy I mentioned that clock in, clock out mentality, because that's something that's easy to fall victim to being in vocational ministry. And I've talked about Jesus so much already today. He was the topic of all my meetings. And
Do we have to pray every meeting?
Yeah, have to pray. But newly married and trying to figure out what that free time looks like, and also intentional time with my wife. She's still working multiple jobs. She's working evenings mostly. So there's a lot of small windows where we come together, and I've had to really merge that time with my wife as well as with God to really be intentional and grow together as one flesh. Because one thing I kind of presumed or assumed of married life was, we'll have plenty of time to pray together and read together. Going from dating to marriage, it's easy to think we'll have so much more time. False. It is very hard to assume and automatically have time with my wife in prayer or with Hannah in studying and all that stuff. And so especially with her serving in youth, we can very easily both gravitate into this works mentality because it's work. And so that's so hard. And I just think for me personally to really reflect on what the Lord showed me, at FBC in my vocation, but really how can I continue to grow personally, because God allowed me to work here based on the work He's been doing in my life. And so the thought of Him not being in communion with me outside of work could inhibit that ability. So
and I think of the fact that I've got kids and now they're grown, and we were really intentional when they were younger. And I feel like the busier we get, the older they get, the more things are happening, and it just slowly slips. So it has to be intentional. There is this concept of passing on to the next generation that we're always preaching, but it doesn't just happen because it just, you start having a conversation. There's this intentionality that still, as a parent, you have to set aside that time.
And both of you are using that in a great analogy. Our relationships with our spouse or kids or a roommate or a grandparent that might be near us or whatever. It's an intentional, purposeful mindset that at times even discipline, where you have to you may love them to death, you'd die for them, but
when's the last time you talked with them?
Yeah, you still have to. And so the same thing as that analogy is the relationship with the Lord, because it is so as say married people, you got to carve out some time sometimes to get away. Lisa and I, we were gone for a week and went down to Charleston, South Carolina. And it was just the two of us, and we needed the conversations in the car, or just just that time away. So one suggestion is, built into our week should be a day of worship and rest that's
Sabbath
devoted.
Rest.
It's a Sabbath rest, and God built that in, and I think. I think that's a challenge for any of us, is to say, are we really doing that? Are we intentional? And I mean in terms of not our personal rest, so we take naps, and I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about nurturing our relationship with God.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned that the maybe average Sally and Harry Christian, we're not utilizing the day of rest to really be a day of connecting relationally with the Lord in that worship. So Sunday morning should be a time, or Saturday night service should be a time we're intensely connecting with the Lord. We're being brought to His presence through the songs we sing that are carefully and prayerfully chosen, message in God's Word, some connection. But it doesn't begin there, doesn't end there. It begins when we get up that Lord's Day morning. It should continue somehow throughout the day, where we intentionally focus on a life of connecting with Him. So that's just, again, I think a practical.
But that's convicting, because my mentality when I'm thinking rest is to unwind and sit back and turn on the Netflix or
your own
go
selfish
rest. Read somewhere else,
watching a Western on TV,
watching a Western,
Read
which
a Louis L'Amour
still,
novel.
Again, there's still a place for that.
There is,
but
the intention of the heart,
the intention to be, where am I connecting with God? How am I just resting in Him and allowing Him to speak into my life, and for Elijah, he wasn't in the storm and the wind, he's in the calm and the peace.
Yeah.
And so just to get away and just be like, okay, God, where's my life today?
How do we connect with one another in relationship? What has worked well in friendships or with spouses? Well, transfer that over to your connection with the Lord and apply some of those things there. Some very practical things. But again, it is a why do we do that? Well, by the mercies of God, when we realize what God has done for us, the call to be in His presence, and to personally know we have an audience with the Creator of the universe. I mean, the audience with the Creator of the universe, and wanting and not wanting to nurture that, is like bizarre.
Yeah, I find that being a worship leader, I've been to dozens of conferences, and we talk about this all the time. So I've been immersed in this content for many, many years now. So I recognize that it might not be, might be new for some of you guys listening, but for me, I talk, breathe, eat, and sleep this stuff. And I have books and conferences, and I feel like Alicia over here, because I've got books over here to show. Yeah. And on my iPad, on Kindle, many that I've read. But this one that our pastor of worship, Mike Lukens, brought to us about 14, 15 years ago, Engaging with God, a biblical theology of worship, is very rich, very deep, by David Peterson. And he has his essential hypothesis and theory of the entire book says this, that the worship of the living and true God is essentially an engagement with Him on the terms that He proposes and in the way that He alone makes possible. And so the whole book is resolved and focused on this idea of engaging with God. And that's what we're talking about. How can we on a regular, daily basis engage with God? And there's plenty of other books that I could recommend. Worship Matters by Bob Kaufman. We've talked about this other one. Rhythms of Grace by Mike Cosper. There's plenty of other just great books that dive into this content, which, by the way, I am going to meet with some of the worship team members this week, and we'll do a podcast that will release this coming Friday that will get even further, because I have other questions and thoughts that we can get into now, but time restricts us, and it can continue. But just so look out for that on Friday. But
how can we be a regular, intentional worshiper of God? That is what we are called to be. It's what we're going to be doing in eternity. But why not be as much of an expert now, this side of heaven, and be engrossed in the incomparable beauty and glory of the God that we serve. And once that happens, that's when we begin to radiate that out into this world. It's what is going to attract people. Jesus said, if I'm lifted up, I'll draw people to myself. As Dwight L. Moody once said, someone asked him, why do people come around you so much? He said, because I'm on fire for Jesus, and people love to come and watch you burn. They just love to see someone burn. And so there is an attraction that is not forced. It's a natural outflow. You just know you've been around someone who's been in the presence of God. Moses went before God, the Shekinah glory, but had put a veil over it. And it was, it began to dim. And Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 3 that happened to Moses. But for us, we are being changed glory into glory as we come close to Him and we worship Him. So that's what discipleship is all about. In a way, we are to prepare and deploy dependent disciples. What is a disciple? It's someone who is shining with the glory of God. Why? Because they've been in His presence. Why? Because they made it a priority. And they're worshipers of God.
And the first part of that mission statement, out of a desire to glorify God as a spiritual community. To me, and again, the mission statement of FBC is just so impactful. I mean, and I love how it comes together so succinctly. But a desire to glorify God is our ultimate purpose, and we're a spiritual community to do it together, and then we're preparing and deploying the dependent disciples.
When you hit the buzzword of community, because here are the facts. 2 years ago, we didn't have a podcast, and we saw merit in starting one so that we can be a part of your week, your commute, after or before your community group, get some extra stuff from the pastor that maybe didn't make it into the pulpit. That's been awesome and fruitful. We obviously, I don't think anybody listening would disagree with the fact that Sunday mornings at FBC are fruitful, but podcast plus weekend is what, 3-4 hours max. Are you in a community group?
Yeah.
Are we embracing community where we can see other people wrestle with this same idea together? Because you mentioned it, we're not all there.
Yeah.
we're going to have to figure that out.
To be reminded.
Right. Yeah. Well, right of the book of Hebrews, chapter 10 says, we need to encourage one another as long as it's still called today.
Yep.
To run this race, to challenge, stimulate one
Spur
another,
one
to
another
love
on.
and good deeds. So you're right. Community, again, personal time, as we've talked about, with other believers, the Lord's Day, the gathering of worship corporately, smaller groups individually, and then I just also want to challenge this vacation with God. This, even if it's a day. I mean, every week it should be a day of rest and worship beyond an hour. But maybe an extra weekend, maybe going away somewhere for 2 days. By the way, I've recommended this already, but our Good Friday service that we put together,
Retreat of Silence,
it's go to our online page, take that with you, and use that for a morning of connecting with the Lord. It's something that is timeless. So nurturing these things is of utmost importance. Yep. Paul tells us in Ephesians 5, he said, redeem the time because the days are evil. And we can get so much of the grime and the dirt of life. We need that cleansing of being in his presence. The Jews would have these mikvahs, these baptismals. You go to Israel and you see them everywhere.
Yep.
They'd go into those cleansings, and we need those mikvahs of the times of cleansing with the Lord. And it's habits of the heart. It's something we need to pursue, not legalistically, but through his power. As we present ourselves to him, and that's what the passage said.
Yep.
Present yourselves to him. Here I am, Lord. Okay, if I'm going to accomplish, is this going to happen in my life? You got to do it.
Living in holy sacrifice.
That's right.
That's what it says.
Do your work, God, in our life.
And the church is not the avenue to God. Christ is and wasn't the only one. The church is a resource for that.
That's
right.
So
I think one positive out of the whole COVID year we've just had is we have content online that can help with this. We have resources, ways to connect, get plugged in, and find other Christians so that the conviction and awe-inspiring glory of God we get on a Sunday morning can be paired with encouragement and building one. You can't. The building up of the congregation isn't going to happen on a Sunday morning.
We gathered last week to watch the video, the service of Don and Patty Den Hartog's daughter's funeral service, and that came out so clearly, and it was something Don and Patty's daughter wanted to have come out, as she's in the presence of the Lord. Her race is finished, but we're still running the race. And Moses says in Psalm 90, in that psalm that he wrote, teach us to number our days, that we can present to you a heart of wisdom. We're going to stand before God. They came out on that service and give an account.
Yeah,
and give an account. So let's run the race with endurance. Let's present ourselves a living sacrifice, because when it's all said and done, that is what matters.
Yeah.
Is soon this life will all be past, and what's done for Christ will last. And let's make our life a life of worship for him.
It's good stuff. Mark, what do we need people to know before we get out of here?
Yeah, I mean, there's, like you said, plenty of opportunities right now here at the church to continue to grow in your walk with the Lord. There's this intentional parenting class that's going on Sunday mornings at 10:45, just practical examples and ways that you can just raise your kids and teach them in the ways of the Lord.
And by the way, I talked to 2 young couples at the Kids Zone thing last night.
Yeah.
New to FBC, they want to get to meet people, and they went to that class. They loved it. Awesome. And it was a way to connect around the tables and to visit. And so it was not just great content, but great opportunities to get connected with others.
And from that, if you're new to FBC and watching or listening to us for the first or second time, there is a get to know you event that's happening in May on a Tuesday night on the 17th, I believe is what it is. 11th. Sorry, yes, 11th. It's sooner than that.
Yeah.
I don't have my calendar in front of me.
Yeah.
And then. So that's an opportunity to learn about the church.
Is that the same as what we did in April?
Yep.
Same
yeah.
kind of. Okay,
yeah.
cool.
So very simple.
Get to know
just
FBC.
Just meet a few people, and then opportunities to serve the children's ministry. FBC kids are having a rally for anybody who just wants to be a part of their ministry. But it's more than that. It's just how can you impact the children for Christ?
Yep.
How can you use your gifts and your talents, or just your body, just your time, to make a difference, to impact kids. teach them in the ways of the Lord, or even impact their parents by allowing them the opportunity to attend the worship times.
And as we re-engage more and more now in this kind of, I don't know if it's a post-COVID world, but in a changing COVID world, we want to expand our children's ministries again, we need to do that. So
that's on Tuesday, May 18th. I would get my dates mixed up, but that's just come for a quick 45-minute rally, just to get motivated and encouraged and understand the vision of that ministry. So those are the few key things, and we will be doing another Fellowship Together event in June, so be on the lookout for that. We've been getting some supplies together, and a movie night outdoors is in the works.
Awesome.
So
sweet.
Be ready for it.
Sounds good. Well, thank you guys for being here. Thank you so much to our viewers and listeners. As a reminder, you can find us all over the place, podcast services across the board. Type in Sermon Spotlight. We pop right up, fbcva.life/Sermon Spotlight to communicate with us directly. The fact of the matter, everybody, is that sermons are not meant to just take an hour, but rather transform a lifetime. Until next week, much love and God bless.